I was 22 in 2009, getting ready to leave California for a corrections job on the East Coast. The whole drive felt like a blur, but the part that really stayed with me was when I hit that stretch people call the loneliest highway. It was around 3 in the morning on a Sunday, and I hadn't passed a single car in at least half an hour. Even though I was starting to feel drowsy, I wasn't tired enough to pull over, so I just kept going until I saw a lone car sitting on the shoulder with its hazards blinking. A woman was standing next to it, and because the road was empty and the night was so quiet, she looked almost out of place. I slowed down and rolled my window down just enough to talk. Something about her put me on edge right away. I couldn't explain it then, but now I know it was just my instincts trying to tell me something was wrong. I asked if she needed me to call a tow truck or AAA, and instead of answering, she immediately grabbed at my door handle. I told her I wasn't comfortable letting a stranger into my car, but I'd wait with her until help arrived. That's when her whole expression changed. She got annoyed fast, saying things like, "You're a big guy. What do you think I'm going to do?" and calling me heartless for not letting her warm up inside. This is the part I still regret. I let her guilt me into unlocking the door. I figured she couldn't do much to me. She was tiny, barely over 5 feet, maybe 90 pounds at most, and I had more than 100 pounds on her. She slid into the seat, and I tried to stick to the plan and asked who I should call. I had one of those old BlackBerry sliders at the time. Instead of answering, she kept telling me she didn't want a tow truck and would rather I drove her to the next town. She wouldn't look directly at me and kept digging around in her purse, which only added to the uneasy feeling I was trying to ignore. I was so focused on trying to get out of the situation that I didn't realize someone else was there. It wasn't until a guy stepped into view near my driver's side door that I caught him in the rearview mirror. I hadn't seen him at all before that. He must have been hiding behind her car or crouched down next to it. By the time I noticed, he was already reaching toward my door. That was when everything kicked in at once. I threw the car into drive and hit the gas just as he was about to open it. As I sped off, I heard a sharp metallic sound, and then the mirror on my door broke apart. It took me a second to understand he'd actually fired a shot at my car. I just kept driving, nearly hitting 90, and the woman in the passenger seat suddenly realized her plan wasn't working. She started hitting me and telling me to stop. After I'd put a good amount of distance between us and her partner, I pulled over and told her to get out. She went for her huge purse again like she was trying to grab something, and at that point I'd had enough. Between the adrenaline and the anger, I just leaned over, shoved the door open, and pushed her out before she could do anything else. A bunch of stuff fell out of her purse onto my seat. Napkins, lipstick tubes, and several things that were clearly drug-related. But she managed to keep hold of the bag itself. I drove off with the door still hanging open, slammed it shut once I felt safely far enough away, and kept going until I reached a Denny's later that morning. When I finally sat down inside, everything hit me at once. I barely touched my food. I gathered up all the things she'd dropped and threw them out because I was trying to keep my record clean for the job I wanted. And I didn't want drug paraphernalia anywhere near me. I did end up talking to a cop who was parked at a gas station across the street, but the first thing he did was lecture me for pulling over and for letting her in. He said he'd check it out, but I never expected anything to come of it. Even after all these years, I still hesitate when I see a stranded car on the side of the road. I know not everyone out there is trying to hurt someone, but that night made it hard to take chances. My 2 friends and I had been staying with my family at the beach, and since it was a solid 7-hour drive from home, we usually stayed the full Saturday to Saturday week. But this time, one of my friends had to be back at work, so instead of waiting for the weekend, we decided to head out around 11 p.m. on Thursday. We figured the overnight drive would be easier. We'd avoid the usual traffic, and the trip home always felt quicker anyway. It seemed like a smart idea at the time. Around 3 a.m., we were reaching that long stretch of highway in West Virginia that feels like it goes on forever. More than 100 miles with no service, no towns, just rock walls, trees, and mountains closing you in on both sides. Jay was passed out in the back seat, C was driving my car, and I was staying awake with her up front. The road had 3 lanes, and there wasn't another vehicle in sight until a tractor trailer rolled in from one of the exits. It settled into the right lane. Since we were in the middle, C got over to the left just to give him space. But then he moved left too. So we slid back into the middle, and he immediately followed. We tried the left lane again, same thing. Every lane change we made, he mirrored, like he was blocking us on purpose. It went from weird to unnerving pretty fast. It was pitch black outside, deep in the mountains, nothing around us, and suddenly this massive truck was pacing our every move. Jay woke up because I must have let out something louder than I meant to. She sat up, looked over her shoulder and said, "Whatever you do, don't look," which of course made me look. I caught the truck's lights in the side mirror, and it was already coming up on us way too quickly. Within seconds, the truck was right on our bumper, inches away, lights bright enough to swallow the whole inside of the car, and he was hammering on the air horn like he was trying to push us off the highway. C floored it, and all 3 of us were yelling, part panic, part trying to figure out what the hell to do, while this truck kept bearing down on us like he wanted to climb right over the car. We were hitting speeds I had never seen my car reach, and he was still glued to our back end. We were coming up on the exit we actually needed, but the problem was that the exit ramp was basically one giant curve, almost a full loop. We couldn't slow down much without risking him slamming into us, so C took the turn at something like 80 plus, which should have sent us spinning out. I genuinely don't know how we made it through that curve upright. I remember glancing back as we were turning and seeing his headlights still right behind us, following that curve like it was nothing. We got onto the connecting road, trying to catch our breath, when a second tractor trailer came out from another exit and immediately joined in, lights flashing, horn blaring like they were working together. We didn't even have time to process it. We just kept accelerating, trying to put as much distance between us and them as possible. Thankfully, the road hit a steep incline, and the truck started to fall back under the weight of their loads before the second one could close in on us. We pushed the car as hard as it would go up that mountain and didn't ease off the gas for a long time. When we finally slowed down, it was a good 30 minutes later, and my hands were shaking nonstop. I don't think I've ever been more relieved to see the familiar roads leading toward home. Even now, when someone mentions late-night highway driving, that whole night comes right back to me. Back in February 2 years ago, I was getting ready for what was supposed to be a normal Saturday night out with my friends. It was one of those things we did almost every week, meeting up at a club in Larimer County, having a few drinks, messing around, just trying to shake off the stress from the week. I didn't even always feel like going, but it was easier to show up than to deal with the group chat blowing up about who bailed and why. That afternoon I'd been at my grandparents' place. Nothing big, just hanging out, helping them with a few errands, sitting around talking. When I left and drove back home, I figured I'd get ready quickly and head out. I showered, put on the clothes I usually wore on nights like that, grabbed my phone, wallet, and keys, and walked out the door without thinking twice. If I'd known what was coming, I probably would have stayed inside and locked every door. The highway closest to my neighborhood is only a few minutes away, and I'd been on it for maybe 15 or 20 minutes when things went bad. I was in the faster section, cruising in the 70s, not really thinking about anything except the music playing and the fact that I was running a little late. Up ahead, on the opposite side, I saw a police car angled toward traffic. My first instinct should have been something simple. Speed trap, maybe someone pulled over. But that thought never crossed my mind. I didn't notice anything strange on the road either. Sitting in an SUV, you don't see much of what's directly in front of the bumper. Then the whole car jerked hard. It wasn't a pothole. It wasn't debris. There was too much weight under the tires. Everything inside me knew immediately what had happened before I even formed the words. I'd run over a person. I managed to pull onto the shoulder, put the car in park, and turn on the hazards. But the moment the vehicle stopped, I completely fell apart. I couldn't breathe right. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my phone the first time I tried to pick it up. I knew there was no way for me to get out and run back up the interstate, not with cars flying by in the dark at almost 80, and I wasn't going to drive the wrong way to get back to the scene. All I could do was call for help. When the 911 operator answered, I barely got the first sentence out before she said they were already aware of the situation, that an officer had been calling it in. She told me to come straight to the station. I don't remember most of that drive. I just remember pulling into the parking lot and trying to keep it together long enough to walk inside. They handed me a form and told me to explain what happened. After I turned it in, the woman at the desk said the department would reach out over the next week. I walked out of the station in a daze. My phone had missed calls and unread messages from my friends asking where I was. I called one of them, Bob, and told him I wasn't coming, told him why. He stopped talking for a second and then asked if I was okay. I told him no, not really, and that I needed time. He got it. I went home and crashed without even changing clothes. Over the next week, the investigation filled in everything I hadn't known. The man I hit was named Brent Thompson, 28 years old. A deputy had pulled him over after running his plates and seeing the expired registration. Brent gave a fake name. The deputy figured it out, and when he walked back to confront him, Brent panicked and ran. He crossed the fence line and jumped down onto the interstate, right into the area where I happened to be driving. The deputy tried to stop him with a taser. Brent went down in the road, and in the dark, moving at highway speed. I never saw him. Brent didn't survive. His family later filed a lawsuit, but the district attorney ruled the deputy's actions lawful. I wasn't charged either. On paper, every choice I made that night was the right one. That doesn't mean it sits any easier. I haven't driven since. I know it sounds extreme, but the idea of being behind the wheel again makes my stomach twist. Now I get around by Uber, or I ride with friends. People tell me it wasn't my fault, that I didn't do anything wrong, and I understand that logically. But something about that moment, the impact, the not knowing, the minutes after, never really leaves you. And that night ended up being the last time I ever drove a car. I'm a 25-year-old woman living in a downtown area in Florida that's small enough to feel familiar, but crowded enough that there's always something chaotic going on. I'm not big on the nightlife scene here. It has a reputation for sketchy encounters, and I've known more than a few people who ended up in miserable situations from getting drugged or approached by people who didn't know how to take no for an answer. I usually avoid all of that and stay home with my dog, who is honestly a much better use of my time. But one night around 7, I was sitting around doing absolutely nothing, bored out of my mind, and made the brilliant decision to download Tinder again. I've never taken the app seriously, more like something to swipe on when I'm restless. I matched with someone I recognized from high school, someone I hadn't talked to in years, and we ended up making plans to catch up over tea around 9. It seemed harmless enough, so I went. We talked for a few hours, and before I knew it, it was midnight. I left feeling tired but relaxed, and figured the fastest way home would be the toll road. My dad lives 3 time zones behind me, so I called him to stay awake while I drove. After about 15 minutes of talking, I saw my exit coming up. I told my dad I'd call him tomorrow, hung up, and moved into the exit lane. The ramp curves to the right, and as soon as I went into it, I saw someone running toward my car, waving their arms like they were trying to flag down a fire truck. I was going around 35, so seeing a person sprinting at me in the dark made my whole body tense up. I switched on my high beams and slid over a little so I didn't hit him. My first thought, stupid I know, was that he might have crashed somewhere nearby or gotten separated from his friends and needed real help. Against my better judgment, I pulled over into the emergency lane and locked everything before he got close. He looked about my age, maybe a couple years younger. He had one of those wristbands from the bars, so I figured he'd been out downtown drinking. But his eyes were huge, and he was sweating like he'd run a marathon. It wasn't hot out, and the way his face looked, wide, panicked, almost like he couldn't process anything around him, put me on edge. He tugged on the passenger door, but it didn't open, thank God. I cracked the window just enough to talk and asked if he was hurt or needed help. He said he couldn't hear me and begged me to let him in. He wasn't yelling, but there was something frantic in the way he kept repeating himself. I told him no, and he quickly switched from panicked to desperate. He kept insisting that he didn't want to scare me, that he'd been left downtown. His phone died, his friends ditched him, and he had no way home. I offered to call someone for him, but the number he gave me didn't pick up. That's when it shifted. His face changed. Confusion, frustration, something else layered under it. He started insisting he knew me. "I know you live near me, Maria. You know me, through Anthony. Maria, please, just take me home." My name isn't Maria, and I don't know an Anthony. The way he said it made me second-guess myself for a moment, like maybe we had crossed paths before and I'd forgotten. But the longer I looked at him, the more obvious it became that he had no idea who I actually was. He kept trying the door again, more frantic than before, and then started crying and hitting the window with his palm. I told him to step back because I was leaving, and thankfully he did. I merged back onto the ramp and headed toward the stoplight at the bottom. And then the light turned red. I took a second to grab my phone and decided I should call the police, not to get him in trouble, but because he was literally running into traffic in dark clothes at midnight. While I was explaining everything to the 911 operator, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him sprinting down the ramp toward my car again. That sight alone made every muscle in my body tighten. The operator told me not to drive home, to go in the opposite direction, so he wouldn't be able to follow me to my apartment. I did exactly that, describing him as I drove through empty streets with him still chasing behind me, full speed. When I reached a stop sign behind another car, he caught up and started banging on the back windshield, yelling for me to stop, asking me again to let him in. When the car in front of me moved, I turned down a different road and managed to lose him. The operator stayed on the line until I was sure he wasn't behind me anymore. She took my info, told me officers were already heading toward that area, and said I was okay to go home once I felt safe. I never found out who he was or what happened after. My guess is he was drunk, but also on something else, because I've never seen someone who was just drinking act that out of touch with reality and still run like that. Last April, during my senior year of high school, I was counting down the days until spring break. Growing up in the Midwest meant the scenery never changed much, so any chance to get out and see something different always felt like a big deal. That year, the plan was to head to Oregon with my friend Mary. She was a few years older than me and dating my best friend Josh, who was studying at the University of Oregon. She was moving out there the exact week of my break, so it matched up perfectly for me to ride along and split the drive. We left on a Friday night around 10:30, which wasn't ideal, but it helped us slip through Chicago in the middle of the night with almost no traffic. Saturday was mostly a long stretch of empty farmland, with nothing interesting to look at until we reached Badlands National Park, which at least broke up the monotony. By the time it hit around 11 that night, we were both worn down and decided to book a hotel in Montana, a few hours ahead of us. As we got deeper into that part of the country, the towns grew farther apart, and everything around us turned into wide-open plains and reservation land. Not long after turning down a long, rough-looking road, we noticed only one other vehicle behind us, a big white truck that had been trailing us for a while. At first it didn't seem odd, but eventually the truck got right up behind us, way too close for comfort. Mary slowed down so it could pass, and the moment there was room, it shot ahead. We were tired and took it as a sign that whoever it was probably drove that route often, so Mary sped up a bit to keep pace and hopefully reach the hotel sooner. A few minutes later, we came to a turn and noticed the truck was heading the same way. It pulled into the parking lot of a small bar on the corner, so we kept going. But instead of parking, it just sat there. As we passed, it pulled out and got behind us again. I told Mary I had a bad feeling, but she brushed it off. She figured he probably didn't want us behind him earlier, and that it was nothing. For a moment, I talked myself into agreeing, especially once I saw him turn off the road. I relaxed a little after that. About half an hour later, Mary was clearly fighting to stay alert, so I told her I'd take over driving as soon as she found a safe place to pull off. The problem was that we were on a stretch of road that didn't connect to anything else. No houses, no gas stations, no stores, not even driveways. Just empty land as far as you could see. She finally decided to pull off on the shoulder, but right as she slowed down, a set of bright headlights came flying up behind us out of nowhere. The vehicle swerved close enough that it pushed us toward the side of the road, and we only barely managed to stay in control. Once we stopped, we realized it was the same white truck. It rolled to a stop maybe 15 yards ahead of us. I told Mary not to get out, and to just keep driving, no matter what. She still didn't think it was necessarily dangerous, but could tell I wasn't imagining things. As she eased the car back onto the road, he started moving too. A little ways up the road, he pulled into a patch of trees and shut off his lights entirely. That was the moment Mary finally understood why I kept insisting something was wrong. She called Josh for advice since we wanted a third opinion, but he wasn't the type to jump to conclusions and wasn't seeing what we were seeing. He suggested we just stay alert and continue driving. So that's what we did. For about 20 minutes, there was no sign of him. But as soon as we approached a small town, I spotted him waiting at a side street with his lights off, positioned so he was facing the road we were on. When we passed, he immediately turned his headlights on and pulled out behind us again, this time following so close it was impossible to ignore. Mary called 911, but we were so far from civilization that the signal kept dropping. The dispatcher couldn't pinpoint our location, and even our map wouldn't load. It felt like we were cut off from everything. At one point, the truck passed us again, and I yelled for Mary to speed up enough for me to get his plate number. We managed to catch it right before he shot off into the distance. Eventually, the dispatcher was able to track us and told us to drive straight to the nearest police station, which was about 15 or 20 minutes ahead. She told us not to stop for anything and explained that the way he kept passing us was a tactic. It allowed him to see which direction we were going so he could stay ahead and wait for us. That was when everything settled in for both of us. He didn't need to stay visible to be in control of where we were headed. He appeared behind us once more before disappearing again. I finally got my phone to load the police station directions, and we were just a few minutes from the turn. But when we reached the intersection, neither of us mentioned it. The road ahead looked like the exact type of place he'd expect us to turn, so Mary kept driving. She asked me where the turn was, and that's when I admitted we passed it. She swung the car around and headed back. On the return stretch, we passed the truck going the opposite direction. We're almost certain he didn't notice us. When we got to the station, they were already waiting outside. A few officers headed out immediately to search for the truck, while another group arranged to escort us an hour down the road to our hotel. The rest of the trip went on without anything strange happening, but we later figured out he'd followed us for somewhere between 60 and 70 miles. We never heard whether they found him or learned what he wanted. But even now I get a bad feeling anytime I see a white truck that looks even slightly similar. If you ever find yourself on a long drive through empty stretches of road, pay attention to who ends up behind you. It matters more than you think. I'm 32, and this happened barely 2 nights back. My husband Kevin and I were out on the porch having a cigarette around 9. We live pretty far out in the woods, right off a long stretch of highway that sits between 2 interstate exits. Nights are usually quiet except for the occasional car, so we were just standing there looking at the stars, enjoying the sound of crickets and the break from the usual traffic noise. That's when I heard something faint, just enough to make me pause. I told Kevin to hold on, even though he wasn't talking. It took me a second to realize it really was screaming. A woman. And not the kind of scream you hear from someone startled or messing around. This was full-on panic, like she was in serious trouble. Between the screams, She was yelling for help. I looked at Kevin, and he looked back at me, and we both knew this wasn't normal. The sound was getting closer. I could eventually see a figure running along the median, heading toward the part of the highway that passes in front of our house. We're set back from the road, but close enough that we can make out anyone out there, which meant she could see us too. Our yard doesn't have any security lights, so we were basically standing in the dark. The only reason we could see the road was because the neighbors across from us still had their Christmas lights up. I dropped my cigarette and backed up into the doorway while pulling out my phone. She was still in the median screaming. If anyone else along this road heard her, they sure weren't doing anything. Kevin rushed inside, grabbed his jacket and shoes, and I tried to tell him not to go out there. Of course, he didn't listen. Before he came back out, a red car flew up the road and stopped near her. She was in the median, and he pulled over on the opposite side of the highway, but they were close enough to yell at each other. There was a man driving. Couldn't see his face. Just heard him shouting that he was going to kill her and calling her names. It looked like he was throwing something out of the window at her, maybe her stuff. As soon as she saw him stop, she ran straight toward our yard. I was already on the phone with 911, but being this far out, service cuts in and out, and I knew it would take a while for anyone to reach us. I yelled for Kevin, and I told my son to go into our room with the baby and shut the door. He could hear everything and was scared. Kevin ran outside and met the woman halfway. He asked if she was okay, and she told him she'd gotten a ride home from the man in the red car. Halfway down the road, he started acting off. He wouldn't let her out where she asked, kept driving, and she noticed duct tape in the back seat when she looked over her shoulder. She panicked, opened the door while the car was moving, and hit the pavement before running as fast as she could while yelling for help. Kevin guided her toward the house while talking to the dispatcher on his phone, since he had gotten more details out of her. We let her inside and locked every lock we had: knob, deadbolt, and chain. Up close, her face looked rough. She had scrapes and red patches from hitting the road, and she said he had hit her before she managed to get out. We stood by the window waiting for the police, Kevin still on the phone updating them. He told them the guy's car was parked across the highway by a house with bright blue Christmas lights. Right then, there was a heavy bang on our door. The man was yelling that he knew she was inside, that he saw her running, that nobody in the house could protect her. I yelled back through the door that he needed to leave and that the police were on the way. What he said back made my whole body tense. He said he didn't care and that they wouldn't get there in time. Then he hit the door again. The woman was crying and repeating, "Please help me," and I ran into the kitchen to grab the biggest knife we had. Our door is solid iron, but the windows aren't. If he really wanted in, he could have made it happen. Kevin came out of the bedroom with his gun just as the first cruiser pulled into the yard. 2 more came in behind it, and 1 went across the street to where the man's car was. As soon as the lights hit the driveway, he took off running into the woods. The officers checked on the woman and brought her home. She actually lived across the highway, just a few houses down. The police searched for him for hours but didn't find anything. There are more hiding spots in these woods than you'd think. I'm just hoping he decided to put as much distance between himself and this place as possible.